Okay, here we are. Welcome, Vitalik, to the Defiant podcast. I'm so thrilled to have you here.
Thank you very much, Camilla. It's good to be here.
Yay. Okay, so for those of you who don't know Vitalik, I'm sure everyone listening will know him, but Vitalik Buterin wrote the Ethereum white paper in 2013 when he was just 19 years old. He inspired a group of dreamers to help him build this new blockchain that was meant to be a flexible base layer on top of which to build decentralized applications, a so-called world computer that could run any program built on top of it without the need of a third party. So Vitalik, Ethereum launched in 2015. In the almost 7 years since, would you say it has succeeded in becoming a world computer?
I think it's definitely succeeded at a lot of things. I think it's definitely succeeded at just kind of making all of the applications and even most of the applications that were described in the original white paper actually happen, and people actually being able to use them and seeing what they would actually look like. And a lot of them have quite a few people either playing around with them or using them for just to do things that they really need. The thing that it hasn't really accomplished to is getting to the entire world, right? Mm-hmm. There's kind of the concept of a world computer in the sense of it's a computer that is kind of anyone from in the world can look at and just has at least some basic ability to send programs into and not just read from it but also write to it. And I think Ethereum has done that. There's also this kind of more expansive meaning that I think a lot of people read into it, which is the world only needs one computer now and it can be Ethereum. And that was never the intent, right? Of I don't think Gavin was thinking about that at all when the term came up. But then there's also I think this idea that's been in the project since the beginning that this is supposed to be a platform that is really accessible to the world, and not just in a theoretical way but also in a very meaningful way where lots of people actually can and are accessing it, and there aren't big barriers standing in the way. And I think there's definitely quite a bit of progress that has been made. And about a month and a half ago, I visited Argentina and I saw firsthand just the kinds of diverse people that were using both Ethereum and other blockchains of different kinds as just a regular part of just their lives and and their businesses and their attempts to kind of save money, start projects, pay people, and just do all kinds of normal things. But at the same time, there are these high transaction fees. There's all of these usability barriers, and there's all of these kind of problems that are still left. So if we want to kind of really fully achieve that vision, I do still think that there's quite a lot of work still left to go. Obviously, work that we had hoped would be finished by now or even by 2016 or so. But software, I guess, always takes longer to develop than people predicted. So that's fine. But obviously, the sooner we can actually get doing all get to all of that work being done, the better, and the closer that Ethereum can come to actually kind of reaching this bigger part of its original vision.
Yeah, I totally agree with that view of Ethereum achieving its vision of becoming a world computer in the sense that it really has achieved most of the applications that you even listed in the original white paper. And I just went back and looked at those applications. So you had said Ethereum would be good for token systems, for derivatives and stablecoins, for identity and reputation systems, decentralized file storage, DAOs, savings, insurance, decentralized data feeds, multi-sigs, cloud computing, gambling. I guess that's maybe too much of gambling, prediction markets, and decentralized exchanges. So maybe some in a greater extent than others, all of those applications are being built on top of Ethereum. But I think you're very right to say, and it's a fair assessment, that well, it has become this infinitely flexible platform for builders. It's not really accessible to everyone in the world as kind of you and all of the builders of Ethereum have hoped for. And that takes me kind of to my the next question, which is the next phase of Ethereum, which is meant to achieve this scalability, right? The merge of the proof of stake consensus layer with the application layer currently on the proof of work chain, and of course this is a huge undertaking. I don't know if, correct me if I'm wrong, but it hasn't really ever been tried before, right? To kind of splice blockchains and piece them together and to make a new blockchain. Super complicated stuff, and of course that's why it's taken years to get to the stage where we're finally, I guess, very close to seeing that happen. Um, so, I mean, the whole point of this is to allow Ethereum to scale and while also increasing decentralization. So, what's missing? What are the steps missing for the merge to happen? I'm sure you get this question so much, but it was like the main thing that people wanted me to ask you. So, I'll start with this one.
I mean, I think at this point it basically is testing, right? Like at this point, there are already some like basic test nets and like full implementations of like everything that needs to happen for the merge. Like there's implementations of the consensus clients. There was implementations of the like what we call execution clients now. So like Geth and Nethermind are the bigger ones. And Peter Salagi, the lead dev of Geth, just like tweeted out a few days ago that like Geth is basically one PR away from being ready for the merge, right? So like, PR means pull request. It's just basically a big piece of code that gets kind of suggested to be added to the Geth project, and then it'll actually be added and included at some point fairly soon. So but obviously, like there's still quite a bit of testing left to go. The piece that has seen like the least testing and where there's still some finishing touches being done on right now is the like in what we call the initial sync process. So this is like when a node joins the network for the first time. Then like how do they basically download the kind of what the existing state, so like what the existing like account balances, contract code, and all of those things are, so that they can then kind of be part of the network and go from there. And there's just like some subtleties and kind of the interaction between how the formerly proof of work side does it and how the proof of stake side does it. So like a bunch of technical stuff there, though also huge amounts of progress being made on it. So I think generally people are feeling very good about the merge right now. It's just a bunch of technical work, a bunch of testing, a bunch more testing, and hopefully we're going to be merging pretty soon.
Okay, obviously the big question is, when do you think that'll happen?
I mean, some people are saying June, some people saying July or August. I don't know.
So once this happens, of course, it's not like devs can just pack up their bags and go home, right? This is kind of the first step of a multi-year and very complex process. So can you summarize kind of the different stages that will happen post merge until you think, okay, Ethereum is finally complete? Or I don't know if like you would ever be able to say that Ethereum is complete, but at least complete in this vision of it.
I guess the closest thing we have to that is like summarized in that diagram, the roadmap diagram that I tweeted out back in December. This was the one that talked about kind of the 5 buckets that at least like I used to organize what was left to be done. Where you had the merge, which was basically proof of stake, the surge, which is increasing the capacity of the chain, basically doing sharding and doing a little bit more stuff before that and some more stuff after that. Then there is the Verge, which is Verkle trees, which are basically a technology that makes it easier to validate the chain. So like nodes don't have to kind of be so heavy and require like as big computers as before. Then there's the Purge, which is like making the chain kind of lighter and making the code lighter by not requiring like every node in the network to process and store all of the old history. And then there is like the splurge, which is just everything else. And there's there's a lot of different buckets there, right? Like there's like upgrades to the EVM, there's proposer builder separation, and there's like this fairly long and like a list of just various miscellaneous kind of buzzwords and just fun items of different kinds. And then like there's longer term things like ZK snarks, which are going to be probably everywhere in the Ethereum protocol 5 or 10 years from now. But like that list of things, right? Like just switch to proof of stake, add sharding, so we have some scaling, make sure we have good rollups that are actually taking advantage of the sharding. Make it easier for people to run nodes, make sure that we don't like centralize as a result of MEV and those kinds of issues. Try to make the protocol less complex instead of more complex over time, and then make the EVM better. Like I think if we do all of those and we just do the things that we know that we have to do today, then like Ethereum is in a place where if nothing else is done, even after that, then like we're already in a great place, right? Now, I think if all we manage to do is proof of stake and sharding, then I think we're still in a good place. So there is a sense in which it's like there's basic things that we can do, and then there's like extras, and then there's like extras, and the more extras we can do, in some ways, the better a protocol Ethereum becomes, and even the simpler a protocol Ethereum becomes. So like there's this trade-off where kind of if we're willing to accept more temporary complexity in the development process, then we might get out like more long-term complexity in the protocol design. But like if those don't get done, then like that's also fine, right? And so like there is value in trying to also kind of solidify as many parts of the protocol as soon as we can, just so that people can get to feel safe and know like, hey, this is actually how it is going to work for the long term.
Right. Okay. So basically, you have a set of must-haves and a set of like nice-to-haves in this entire roadmap. And is it fair to say the must-haves are proof of stake and sharding, and then all the rest is kind of okay, would be good to have?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. And when sharding is working, and there are rollups to further increase scalability. Do you think that at this stage, Ethereum would be able to be the single kind of transaction or single settlement layer for like for finance, for the internet, or for like global economic activity, I should say?
I think it'll definitely be big enough to be able to do that.
Okay.
I mean, there's obviously the question of like, will everyone be willing to move all of their activity onto the same blockchain or even any blockchain? But just from a pure like, just can it handle the transactions point of view, it totally will be able to.
Oh, amazing! And would that be the kind of most desirable outcome for you?
That's a good question. Well, like, what would a long-term desirable outcome be for Ethereum? I guess, like, aside from just like are people using Ethereum, there is also the question of like how are people using Ethereum, and like are we actually like are people actually getting benefits from stuff being on the blockchain instead of stuff being done in some other way? So like like for example, there's like a lot of projects that like started off making kind of their like private blockchains, and that stuff basically just turned into like let's basically creating centralized systems that might have like a couple of extra signatures and a couple of extra hashes at a few places, but like users never actually see and never actually really get any like real like security or autonomy or kind of privacy or any kind of benefit from that. So I think once Ethereum becomes mainstream, then I mean, like I personally will definitely like start um, caring much less about like, oh, is 30% of the world on Ethereum or 10% of the world on Ethereum, and much more like is like what actual value is Ethereum through these applications bringing, and like that's something that I think is definitely really important to think about now as well. I just think like the bigger Ethereum gets, the kind of the even more important it becomes to keep thinking about that issue too.
That's a fair point. So for you, like the most desirable outcome for Ethereum comes not through looking at the amount of people or like the percentage of the world that's using Ethereum, but what are they using it for? So what would you want to see people using Ethereum for?
So some of the things that I think like people are using Ethereum for already that I think are like personally think are valuable. One is obviously just the currency use case, right? I think a lot of people do have needs that are just like paying people, moving money between countries, just like savings. And like just ETH by itself provides a lot of that, but then there's obviously a lot of people too who like don't want to handle that much volatility, and so like stable coins, like whether it's things like USDC or whether it's like the more decentralized ones like Dai and Rai, I think like they provide a lot of that for people already. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that's one. Another would be like DAOs. Like DAOs are being used to just like especially being used to pool capital together to kind of do actually interesting and meaningful things. So like City DAO is one of my favorites, like a DAO that's actually trying to like go through the well-made DAO law and like illegally own and govern a new city. There is Vita DAO, which is funding life extension research. I guess the one that kind of got big yesterday was Assange DAO that was funding, I guess, legal defense for Julian Assange. And it looks like it's been getting a lot of money, so it might even end up branching out beyond that. I guess that it depends what the community decides it's going to be. Um, Thinking of Constitution DAO, I think is like an interesting experiment. Like it was like I don't think there's much kind of direct social value that comes out of like literally like just owning a piece of the Constitution, but like just as a demonstration of like hey, like the crypto community can kind of get out there and kind like basically outcompete Wall Street moguls and like like win and own big and important things is I think like it was valuable as a demonstration, and I think like hopefully can give momentum to things like City DAO and all of these other experiments that could be really interesting. So DAOs, I definitely want to see more just DAOs of different kinds and DAOs being used to like, help people do things that they would not otherwise be able to do. Prediction markets. I've been a fan of prediction markets for a long time. Just the idea of using economic incentives to actually like encourage people to make predictions that are as accurate as they can. Right. It's like one of the big problems right now with like just like listening to the media as it exists today. Right. Is that like people have these kind of like pressures and kind of desires in the moments to make these really confident statements that make them like sound like this sort of really impressive alpha reporter that knows their stuff, but like when 6 weeks later it turns out to be complete bullshit, like people don't really remember. And like prediction markets, I think, are just like one really valuable experiment in seeing like can we create something better and create like just a tool to help people understand like what's more likely and less likely to happen in the future. That's more likely to just to give numbers that are actually sane and just not completely crazy. Um, ENS, I have always been a fan of. I like the concept of having names that are not owned by like any one company, like whether it's the traditional DNS system or whether it's Google or Facebook or kind of any existing company, like a name that you can actually own and trust that it is going to be yours and it doesn't like depend on any authorities to be able to continue to exist. I think it's obviously been finding a lot of use within the Ethereum ecosystem, right? Like I mean, like if someone wants to like send me ETH for whatever reason, which like I totally don't need any more of, but like if people wanted to, right, then like they could just type in Vitalik.eth in like their Ethereum wallet, and it would just like resolve to my address automatically, right? And like that's powerful and that's really useful, but like it's also useful in a lot of other cases, right? So like there's chat applications where that just is like what your username is. There's a bunch more things like that. Sign in with Ethereum. This is this kind of movement that's been growing the last half year, like actually being able to use your Ethereum accounts like to log into things, and as like basically as your kind of web identity, and like directly competing with Google identity and Twitter identity and Facebook identity. I think like sign in with Ethereum is a really powerful like tool because of how it like really composes with a lot of other things, right? Because like when people use sign in with Google, for example, like they're often not just looking for is this the same accounts that like signed into this account that like created this profile the first time, right? They're looking for like often anti-spam. Like they don't want people to be able to make like 100,000 accounts and use them to make fake posts or like fake upvotes for a whole bunch of things. And like Google, like basic, like they have like this kind of like very weak form of KYC, right? That just is. So it does make it like you can like get 2 or 5 accounts, but it's hard to get 100,000 accounts. And that sort of thing is something that the Ethereum ecosystem can provide as well, right? Like it's hard to get 100,000 accounts that have an ENS name because like that's just really expensive to do. It's hard to get 100,000 proof of humanity profiles. It's hard to get 100,000 popes. So that's well, when I by the way, when I say Pope, I mean like proof of attendance protocol tokens. I don't mean like 100,000 leaders of Catholicism. That would be really nice to have that too, but no. So like the just like I just think the sign in with Ethereum thing is a good example of how like all of the different applications can start kind of like really coming together and building on top of each other. So yeah, I mean, I think that's really good and valuable too. Some of the like privacy preserving decentralized voting stuff, like there's CLR funds would be one example. There's like a bunch of these kind of quiet experiments. So far, they haven't really gotten too far, but it's like I think also a good use case of like blockchains combined with some of the like privacy preserving zero knowledge stuff to like basically make better governance tools. So there's like this big list of like what I think are actually interesting things that are happening more and more in Ethereum land, right? And I think like if we had more things like that, right? Like if we had more, like even more ability for people to, just to use cryptocurrency internationally or like use DAOs to organize, like whether it's businesses or whether it's like new cities or local like projects, like whether it's a nonprofit or not nonprofits or activism or like funding, scientific research or whatever else. I think that would be really amazing to have. I mean, the other one I think like I didn't mention, but it's like this really interesting double-edged sword, of course, is NFTs, right? Because like it's fascinating in how they just both end up like funding completely crazy stuff and just creating these embarrassing multi-million-dollar splats on the internet, but also NFTs have funded a lot of really important things, and they funded science research, they funded activism, they funded artists, they funded writers, and I think all of that stuff is really important too. So yeah, I mean, like those kinds of things I think are growing, and I think like being able to create applications that are like actually meaningful and valuable, and also that have like that kind of factor of like getting degens excited is something that I think would be really cool to see more of, and I hope like somehow the Ethereum ecosystem can figure more of that stuff out.
I think it's very notable that all the things that you mentioned are actually already happening on Ethereum. Because like we could have had this conversation, back even in 2017, when there was like a lot of activity on Ethereum and a lot of speculation, but a lot of it was actually just speculation. And like fundraising is a use case, but that was pretty much it. But now you mentioned all these things, currency with and like cross-border transfers and remittances with stablecoins, DAOs, prediction markets like ENS, sign-ins, like NFTs, like all these things are actually happening. So even if like some are smaller or just getting started, at least I think it's very encouraging to see all these use cases, actually working at the moment. So okay, so to have all of this activity on Ethereum, I mean, going back to kind of the previous questions of, everything that needs to happen for Ethereum to scale and support all of this wild demand for block space to support all of these use cases. Someone might think, why not just increase Ethereum block size, and just like have this kind of switch and just like instantly scale it. Like, and I guess like a way to summarize that thought is just like, why does decentralization matter? And I wanted to connect this question with your recent trip to Argentina that you mentioned. Because there has been a lot of like increased adoption of crypto in Argentina, but I heard you say in an interview, and I think Santi mentioned this to me as well, that a lot of it is happening on centralized exchanges. So yeah, like why is decentralization important, and how do you kind of balance the fact that like for builders and people kind of inside the space, for many of us it's clear why that is, but for the end user it sometimes isn't.
Right. I mean, I think decentralization is one of those things that's like difficult to understand why it's important until suddenly it becomes really obvious why it's important. Right. I think it's like the most important thing is just like being able to like build on a platform and an ecosystem where like it's not just going to go in some completely different direction that like breaks everything that you were trying to build on top of it, like just because it's in some small group of people's interests, right? Or even just because like some group of people get lazy and decide to like stop maintaining something that they were maintaining. So, like from decentralization being about long-term stability is, I think, something that's really important. Also, like especially decentralization as a long-term stability, even in the face of like often very strong incentives, right? Like there's a lot of these examples of like people building on top of like Twitter or Facebook, and then and they built entire businesses around the APIs of these companies, and then suddenly the API like the companies themselves decided that like they'll shut down those APIs like just because they often just like wants to release their own competitor, or like just for whatever other not very good reason. And like these people's life's work just ends up being like kind of completely destroyed, right? And like even if that doesn't happen, then like when these things become like these single central points of failure, then often there end up being these other forces that end up like that end up leaning on them, right? And one of the challenges when you start having like lots of these centralized intermediaries is that there's a lot of people in the world who want like lots of different kinds of groups of people to just not be able to transact, not be able to kind of live regular economic lives. And like this group of people is like much larger than any group of people that like they would dare like actually write a law making it illegal, right? Like the set of things that's censored is much bigger than the set of things that's illegal. There's like these off there's a lot of legal, like very legal industries, like whether it's like political activism or like the sex industry or psychedelics that end up getting end up getting targeted, often through these kind of very non-transparent and very non-democratic channels where they just like lean on a couple of people that are high up in the middle of some payment processor. People in all kinds of countries. So like often centralized companies would just decide to like not serve entire countries because they just decide that that entire country is like too much of a money laundering risk or whatever, and like that's like something that ends up like hurting and like excluding often hundreds of millions of people, right? I mean, I was born in one of these countries that gets kind of discriminated against in this way quite a bit. So that's if you're on a decentralized system, then like that like you're not going to like be singled out in that way, like just because like either who you are or even something like vague, like or just because who you are ends up like vaguely falling into something like somewhere beside a category that like someone somewhere decides that they don't like. So I think kind of creating this kind of counter pressure against what I think would like very easily emerge if just everything depended on centralization, where there's like 5 different people in between every transaction, and if you just lean on any one of the 5 hard enough, then like people can just lose their ability to transact is something that's important. Mm-hmm. And like even in the absence of that kind of pressure, I think just creating things where that they will keep existing in the same form 5 years from now is something that a lot of people just like underrate and that I think are like really valuable, right? So like if you look at like web pages, for example, right, like the Internet Archive, I think makes life a lot easier for people because like sometimes someone wrote something and then that thing that someone wrote becomes really important and everyone starts kind of building on top of it, and then for whatever reason, it could even be that like their hosting provider like just went out of business or like some totally stupid reason, that page is not accessible to good 10 or 15 years in the future, right? And look, because you have to like often the links break, which is really sad, and I think like more decentralization and like not necessarily blockchains, but things like IPFS could actually fix. But like you have the Internet Archive, and at least like you can go and look and you can find something that existed like 10 or 15 years ago, right? But like where is the Internet Archive for like programs, right? Like what if I want to build some financial thing and I want to build my financial thing on top of Uniswap because my financial thing needs just like some ability to trade tokens around, then like I would feel much easier if I knew that Uniswap would actually exist like 5 years from now or 10 years from now, right? Because otherwise, like for every single dependency that I add, I'm basically taking on the responsibility that like, oh, they might decide to like change or disappear, and then I'll have to scramble and figure out some new thing to go and replace it with. So. Right. That's something that I think is like important for applications. It's definitely important for applications that are building on top of other applications. So I guess to summarize, like there are different reasons why I think like decentralization can be important for different people, and I think I do think that all of them are valuable. I think like decentralization is more valuable the closer you are to like doing something where you really needs to like be sure that the thing that you're doing will continue to be possible to do 2 years or 5 years from now. Like if it's the sort of thing where you can just like you're just doing like some one-time thing, and if it stops working, you can switch to doing a different thing tomorrow, then like you don't actually necessarily need much decentralization. Like maybe you just need competition. And you could say competition is actually a kind of decentralization, but it's still. But if on the other hand, like you are doing something where like, you need to commit to it for a long time, and especially if, but like not only, but especially if that it's the sort of thing where like powerful interests might want it to not exist, then decentralization is useful for you. But also, if you're doing something across a large community where it's difficult for you to agree on like exactly which centralized authorities should be trusted, that's also a place where decentralization becomes more and more important.
So you mentioned all of these reasons why decentralization is important, and of course, for communities and groups of people in repressed or censored societies, it's super important for developers or builders who need to be sure that the rules aren't going to be changed in the future, or that their application can keep running forever. That's super important. But do you think there's a set of people who or applications that simply don't need decentralization? Because like right now, I think
yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah, I
just
mean,
that there's just this push to like have everything. Like Web3 is about bringing every application of the internet on top of blockchains and social media, like everything that we use online. Do you think that's necessary?
I mean, there's definitely lots of applications that don't need decentralization. There's also a lot of applications that I think like could use partial decentralization, but like probably don't need a kind of like very purist approach of like no servers, we do everything on like IPFS and on chains. So social media might even be like a good example of that, right? Like I think there there could be a lot of benefit from creating some kind of social media ecosystem where if I make a post, then like that post's ongoing existence does not depend on like one single company deciding that it should continue existing, and kind of the post and the hash of that post like just lives on its own, and other people can link to it, other people can like it, other people can like retweet it, and you would have like these different and often like centralized algorithms and interfaces for interacting with that content, and that's fine. But like because they don't kind of control the content to the same extent, it would be easier to move between them. Like I think that kind of vision is valuable, right? And but like there, to get the value, like you don't really need to go to like 100% decentralization, right? Like there's a lot of value that you can gain from 20% decentralization or 40% decentralization, and I think that's totally fine. Another example might be like websites for booking flights, for example, right? Like because like the thing that you're ultimately buying is like still a centralized thing. Like it's a promise from a particular company to give you a seat, and if like one of the platforms for doing this breaks like or decides to censor you, you can just like go on the 3 or 4 other ones anyway, right? And like there's even more than 3 or 4 of them at this point. So like things like that when you're just like interacting with like something kind of one time, then like often decentralization is not really needed, right? For thing like if you're the sort of person where you're not like the things that you're doing kind of follow along like very established patterns that are very similar to what plenty of other people are doing, and that kind of have a lot of mainstream support, and your entire life is like that, then like you might not benefit from decentralization that much, right? But I mean, even there, like you could make the case that like you should get an ENS name and like start setting up your profile, like kind of just in case that's something you want in the future. Or, you should put like, at least a couple percent of your money in cryptocurrency, like just in case something happens to your local fiat currency. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of people that like don't really have some, burning need to start where there's just this large value that they get from like kind of blockchainifying their lives. And then there's other people for whom blockchains are like their lifeline today. And I think there's an entire spectrum in the middle. And I think that's fine.
Yeah. I mean, do you think there's a case to be made for blockchain and Web3 to be used not because of its kind of censorship resistance properties, but just because it's better, like it just like it's easier, it works better. For example, like for me, like logging into, or like not logging in, but like just like interacting with DeFi applications, for me that's just better than having to have a password and email and login code for like every different Web2 application. I could see kind of like having this integrated value layer on the internet being just better. than having this kind of separate financial system that is also segmented by geography, and that's like a lot clunkier than to transact online in a way that's not natively online. So I think, I don't know. Do you think there's a case to be made that maybe Web3 is just better, even if some people don't require the decentralization
Mhm.
aspect?
Yeah, I think for international money transfer, crypto is often already better than the banking system.
Mm.
I actually even had to deal with this like fairly recently, trying to send money to a friend who had a bank account that was just like it was just with a one of the smaller banks that like you can't easily like route things directly to, and so you have to use like some corresponding banking thing. And like I ended up like figuring out how to make a banking transfer so it would get there from my Singapore bank account. But it was really complicated.
Mm.
When I did it, I wasn't even sure that I was doing it correctly, and what it ended up taking something like 2 weeks to arrive. And like
Oh, man.
that entire process was fairly stressful. And so I basically told them like, hey, can you please like set up a channel to accept like at least USDC or like DAI or something else. So there definitely are lots. Like for me personally, like even just as someone who like like donates to charities like quite a bit, for example, like crypto is
Mhm.
a vastly better channel than anything in the banking system,
Mhm.
despite having no need for censorship resistance. Now, I mean, you could obviously argue that like in some ways it's still benefiting from kind of censorship resistance and or something like censorship resistance indirectly because kind of traditional finance is just inherently relies on all of these intermediaries and different intermediaries that are based in different countries, and that adds kind of like some inherent friction. And just the way that crypto works is like much more based around ignoring all of that, and like it just gets efficiencies that are really valuable even just for these kind of very fairly simple and boring use cases. But still, that was definitely really valuable. International, yeah, internet like payments in general. I guess like there's a lot of use cases that aren't so much being actively discriminated against by the financial system as much as like they're just not being served because like the people in these systems are kind of like it's complicated and hard to fix it from within the context of the existing system, and there's not much of an incentive to do it. Um,
Mm.
for like accounts and Web3, I think like I'm definitely very bullish on the sign in with Ethereum thing. I actually think that like accounts are this one centralized thing where like there is this kind of theoretical argument that people make, right? That like, oh, users are not good enough, like very good at maintaining their own passwords, and users are going to forget their passwords, or their passwords are going to get stolen, and so you need the friendly big brother to be able to like recover your account if anything goes wrong, right? And like this is the sort of standard argument for why like Google and accounts, Facebook accounts, and all these things have their value. But the problem with this theoretical argument is that it doesn't actually match people's life, like a lot of people's life experience, right? Like
Mm.
even like right now for me 2 days ago, like my Amazon account just got suspended because like their AI suspected fraud of some kind when I was just like trying to buy a new phone, and I like just don't really have a good like a good way of getting it back, and that's been inconvenient for me. Like
Mm.
I've known friends who just lose their like Google accounts, forget their password, and they contact support, and they just like can't get it recovered at all. So like these kind of friendly big brothers that are supposed to help you recover everything, they're surprisingly negligent a lot of the time. Um, and like I think web sign in with Ethereum like plus like kind of better wallet technology, so things like social recovery wallets, I think actually
Right.
definitely could create a much better product for a lot of people. So like that would also be one good example, right, of this kind of like not full decentralization but partial decentralization, right? Like you could still have centralized accounts and centralized websites, but you can use your Ethereum account to sign into them, and I think like that's also definitely a really valuable use case. I mean, I definitely do think that things like sign in with Ethereum are going to be especially valuable to people who having a hard time like getting a phone number for whatever reason. right? And like a lot of these systems, like they, like sometimes these phone number verifiers work well in like the big mainstream countries, but they end up like not working well at all in like the smaller countries that people forget to think about. So
Mhm.
like I do think that if you're the sort of person that like depends on censorship resistance or kind of depends on this kind of like global accessibility that comes from decentralization more, then it's even more valuable. But it is one of those things that definitely has like at least some value for everyone. So yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, I think it's different in different places.
yeah. No, totally agree. So increased adoption for crypto is coming from grassroots communities and like from the private sector, like you saw in Argentina, and like we're seeing in even in the U.S. and in other places, and in other countries, it's coming from more of the top down, right? Like El Salvador adopting Bitcoin as legal tender, and other countries evaluating whether to issue CBDCs. Like India made an announcement recently. So where do you think the kind of major or like biggest wave of crypto adoption will come from in the future? Like, will it come from kind of these like grassroots adoptions and like private sector, or from like top down governments in like adopting crypto for their own national currency?
I'm
And how do
definitely.
these like two things like interact also, like if
Mhm,
like yeah.
mhm. I'm definitely expecting the grassroots stuff to be more effective. Like I think we have even seen this year, like with things like the .eth names, like for example, like that just kind of spread out all the way across Twitter, and there's plenty of people who have those names. Like NFTs have kind of spread very widely, all on their own.
Hmm.
So I think. Like watching applications that just kind of like find that niche and find that like way of both having value and being able to like really express and present that value to a lot of people like can very easily break out. And I could easily see that happening in more cases, right? Like I could see even just like sign in with Ethereum, for example, kind of helping to lead this kind of big wave of Ethereum as an identity, kind of like taking off and being used much more. Um, I think like obviously yeah, like cryptocurrency by itself is something that like I don't really necessarily think we need big coordinated efforts. I think we need like people will just if they find it valuable, they'll find a way to use it, and it's going to just keep growing organically over time. Um, I do think that like there can be a value in coordinated efforts, like the kind that like create a local district where like all the shops accept like Bitcoin or ETH or whatever else. Like that's valuable as a kind of community thing of like saying, hey, this district is kind of now a crypto heavy district, and so people that are like enthusiastic about crypto things are more likely to all move there, and that can create these kind of interesting networks. I do think things like that can actually be valuable. It's kind of like creating a city, but it's like a much lighter version of that, right? But there's other ways of doing that as well, and I hope we kind of experiment with all the approaches. There is what else? Like the whole like kind of crypto gaming thing is another one that's I think trying to find its niche, and like there is a big chance it just breaks out into something fairly successful at some point soon. So I
Like
think
play to
there's
earn.
plenty of well, play to earn, or even just like I don't know. I mean, I think there's like different ways, like hundreds of different models, and like if any one of them becomes really successful, I think it could be successful. Um,
Mhm.
I think the big challenge with institutional adoption that well I guess the value that institutional adoption can provide is that it can like really reduce friction and make it easier for the organic adoption to happen, but institutional adoption by itself when there isn't an organic will I think is something that can just kind of very easily kind of just sputter out and stall, right? Like there's a lot of cases of these big companies that started accepting crypto for payments with a lot of fanfare, and then like a couple years later they realized that like wait, we only have like 45 customers that actually use that option. um, yeah, so I think different in different cases. In the case of like countries like El Salvador just like making it outright mandatory, that's definitely something where I'm definitely more skeptical and more concerned. Like just because like when you like not even just like make an institutional push, but even like start forcing people to accept it, then like you're pushing a technology on people who don't really care much about it and are basically are not even given the option to kind of pass by it, right? And not really care. And so like exposing people in that way to in kind of large numbers to something that they don't understand well, like there's just so many ways in which that can end up going wrong, and like that can end up just leading to people losing money or getting scammed or even
Mm,
just getting disillusioned, right? Like people
mm,
end up even like thinking that like, oh, cryptocurrency equals like this thing that these nasty right wing people want to push, or like this thing that like these nasty like whatever political tribe is kind of running a country that wants to push crypto at that time wants to
mm,
push. And so it could even end up having some negative effects on adoption in the long term. But like I think there are good things that can happen too. Like I think Wyoming's DAO law is an excellent example of government level of crypto supportiveness, right? Like they just created this law that allows DAOs to be incorporated entities and legally own stuff. There's just lots of people that are building on top of that. Like City
mm.
DAO is building on top of that. A lot of projects are building on top of that. So that is something that definitely an example of a good model that I would hope
Mm.
for people to be following more. I mean, Miami, I think, is like interesting. There's, it definitely really helps that like they have this like Francis Suarez, a mayor who's like really enthusiastic about just like being like tech positive and pushing all of those things forward.
Mm.
Um, there and there's Miami coin, and then there's like more and more of these local kind of crypto things happening. So would definitely be lovely to see if any of those experiments end up turning out well.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean, I think there's great ways for institutions to kind of have a mutually beneficial relationship with the crypto space. There's like good ways, there's okay ways, and then there are also ways that like do risk being really counterproductive.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair take. So it's like genuine adoption comes from grassroots, just like individuals and groups of people and communities wanting to use crypto, and then institutions can help that by encouraging it, making establishing kind of the infrastructure, or investing in startups, or just like making a regulatory framework that encourages innovation and so on. So it's like institutions can help this grassroots adoptions by just like helping it thrive. But then there's the wrong way to do it, which is just like pushing crypto on people, basically.
Mhm.
It's kind of the summary. Okay, and then related to this is I wanted to get your thoughts on the U.S. kind of regulatory environment around crypto, which there's just many different initiatives going on. It seems like recently the approach to crypto has been a bit more negative, or skeptical or aggressive by many US lawmakers and politicians. So if the US wanted to really crack down and limit the growth of crypto, how, I mean, do you think they could be able to just like limit its impact and force it to be this like very niche thing? Or do you think that crypto is strong enough and decentralized enough that even if the US took this like very hard approach on crypto, it could still kind of evolve to become mainstream
Mhm.
elsewhere?
Hmm. I think if the U.S. takes a very hard line approach, like it would definitely be difficult for like a lot of like very important crypto things to be done in the U.S. But it would definitely still continue in full force outside of the U.S. I think, but like a world where lots of countries like ban crypto and try really hard to ban crypto is definitely a world in which it's like much harder for crypto and like especially and if good things being built on top of crypto and like attempts to connect it to the kind of existing world more to prosper. I think one of the kind of tragedies that the current regulatory status quo risks falling into is this kind of problem that like you might call anarcho tyranny, right? So like anarcho tyranny is, I mean, it's this kind of political buzzword that people have been using. I forget exactly who coined it, but it's been around for like 50 years. But it's basically the idea of like this state of government that has like it's basically like in anarchy in the bad sense toward people who are doing bad stuff, but then it's a tyranny toward people who are trying to do meaningful stuff. So like sometimes like San Francisco even gets described in this way, right? Like it's very tolerant toward even like people who are trying to like steal food, like steal things from like stores to the point where they often have to like add like extra like put everything behind locks and even like close their hours. But then like if you want to open a new restaurant, well, good luck going through like $100,000 of permits, right?
Mm.
And like that's backwards, right? Like we want the robbers, not the restaurants, to have to go through like $100,000 of permits, and
Mhm.
hopefully the robbers never get them. But like the analog in the crypto space, right, is like if we look at just like fundraising, for example, right? The problem there is that, or what happens a lot of the time is that we have projects where, in order to comply with securities laws, those projects end up explicitly saying, this is a token that has no value. We are not connected to it in any way. We make no
Mhm.
promises. And
Mhm.
if you're buying it, like you're basically giving us a donation, right? So the legal structure that bans like basically this large category of things without like going through this registration process that's like basically like not realistically possible for crypto projects ends up pushing a lot of projects into these alternative structures where they end up either like basically not being open to the public at all and only being open to like this very limited set of investors, and basically you have this kind of situation where the rich people get in at the front, and then the thing opens up to the public, and the public can only buy in when like it's only at an all time high, and then the public's the one that gets fleeced anyway, but just a bit later. Or
Mhm.
they create these structures where like basically the public, instead of buying into something where they have actual kind of like assurances of something, they're basically buying into something where they have no assurances at all except the developer's goodwill, right?
Mhm.
And so it's like, oh, people like Uniswap and these like honest, like very well-meaning DeFi projects are getting subpoenas and have to spend huge amounts of money on lawyers. But then, we have like outright criminals that are stealing millions of dollars that are just roaming free, right? And I
Mhm.
feel like if it was the opposite, right, like if the DeFi projects did not have to deal with so much of this regulatory stuff, but at the same time there was more work going into like going after all these multi-million dollar thefts, like that feels like that would be a world that's better for everyone, right? But like the challenge is that the the reason why anarcho tyrannies happen is that they're just easy, right? Because if you want to do something meaningful, then you have to kind of like in some sense you have to make yourself vulnerable. You have to have a presence. You have to like do things that require long-term plans. You have to have a team. And so like doing meaningful and valuable things makes you more vulnerable than just like doing totally destructive things. And
Mhm.
so if you have this kind of like basically the trap that's often very easy to fall into is a trap that's kind of harder against against the first thing than against the second thing, and like that is like I think a real risk that I do see a lot of regulatory regimes falling into, that of like basically being like creating more barriers in the face of meaningful things than in the face of like things like these thefts and scams that like realistically nobody wants to see existing. Um, like how to kind of create some like basically I think that there just is a need to create the create and agree on like some kind of structures that like just satisfy enough of regulators' concerns, and that the crypto community is willing to participate in, so that they actually can be a better alternative. And like what those might look like, it's I mean, like this is a hard problem, right? Like the reason why it hasn't been solved yet, I think, is that it's a hard problem. But it's yeah, but I mean, I do think it's something that's like worth more people kind of thinking about and looking into.
100%. It's so ironic because it's like regulators criticize crypto about being a wild west, but it's because they are making it a wild west. Like they're just like refusing to properly regulate it, and by not addressing the problem and just like not creating any structure around it, projects are kind of left with having to do these like weird structures where they're like guessing what a security looks like, but nobody has ever told them. So they do these things like you were saying, like not give their investors proper ownership because it looks like a security, and doing these things like, oh, like maybe it's attached to future revenue but not really, and it just like leaves everyone unprotected. So I don't know, like the outlook is, I don't know if you agree, it's a bit kind of um bleak because like it seems like there's like no way forward, like nobody is kind of giving any guidance that we might ever come out of this situation, at least in the US.
Yeah, I mean, I think one answer might be that places other than the U.S. might actually be kind of easier to influence, and like easier to suggest and like actually try approaches that manage to be better for everyone. And so the only way to convince is through a successful demonstration. Like that might actually be one of the answers, right? And like I guess, given that I think like both of us have like substantial outside the U.S. backgrounds, we're definitely in like better position to kind of look at those options than like a lot of those people. Like a lot of the loudest voices in crypto are people who have basically spent their entire lives in the U.S. and don't really think much about like anything outside of it. Yeah. That's one option. And I mean, the other like if either you convince through like words, or you convince through demonstrations, or demonstration, I guess, but the way that you would convince through words that would actually work, I think, at this point is like basically suggesting some new alternative that like enough people find reasonable enough that it succeeds and it kind of moves the needle forward. And like it also doesn't have to be a federal level thing. Like maybe there is something that could be done at a state level. Like I think, as I mentioned, the way that Wyoming had created that the DAO law, I think, like it is something that, like, as far as I can tell, I don't think it has enabled any bad stuff that would not have existed otherwise, but it has enabled like plenty of meaningful stuff, right? And like as I mentioned, like City DAO being a good example of this, and I feel like there's definitely should be lots of other examples like that, and so maybe this is just a problem that we need kind of more minds to be focusing on and looking into.
Yeah. Okay. So I recorded interviews with other guests recently that I wanted to hear your opinions on some of the arguments they made. Arguments that are somewhat kind of against how Ethereum is doing things. So one of these guests was Emin Gun Sirer of Avalanche, and he had this like very incendiary argument about saying that any layer one blockchain that relies on layer two scaling solutions has given up. Like his argument is that relying on layer twos drastically reduces security, increases complexity, and he argues that blockchains should be able to scale from kind of their base, like their core mainnet layer.
I mean, to me, that sounds like, I don't know, like any country that relies on companies to provide any of people's basic needs has given up. Right? Like that's that's like to us that's a statement that sounds obviously real realistic. I mean, obviously there's a few communists that probably believe it very sincerely, but like we see how it's like not true, right? And that's like layer two scaling. Like, layer twos are part of the greater ecosystem of a layer one, and I think like a layer one that is like ecosystems being symbiotic with other ecosystems is, I think, we don't even, I think even saying other ecosystems concedes too much, right? Like, I think, the Arbitrum ecosystem is part of the Ethereum ecosystem. The like Starknet ecosystem is part of the Ethereum ecosystem. The Optimism ecosystem is part of the Ethereum ecosystem, and same with
Mm.
the Loopring ecosystem and Polygon,
Mm.
right? But look, I think. There's nothing wrong with relying on this kind of like beneficial interaction between kind of like different parts and the whole. And I even think that there's important benefits that can come from it, right? Like for example, the Ethereum Foundation historically is like business development is totally not one of its strengths.
Mm.
And you could argue that like part of it is a genuine desire to maintain neutrality and purity and other kind of important things, but part of it probably also just is like us not having certain kinds of talent. But like for example, Polygon, like they do actually have business development, and they have been pretty successful recently at that, right? And
Mm.
like it's not just them. There's plenty of other layer two projects as well. So I think there's nothing wrong with scaling through layer twos. Layer twos are like we need to stop looking at chains as chains, and we need to start looking at them as ecosystems. And
Mm.
different parts of an ecosystem definitely can provide kind of important tools and complement each other really well. And I think like that's perfectly healthy and perfectly fine.
And do you think that that's a kind of secure way to move forward and to build?
I mean, there's no technical reason that makes anything about layer two is not secure, right?
Hmm.
Like technically, yeah, like the logic for how they work, like whether it's roll ups or even whether it's the Lightning Network, like that stuff's been understood and like around for many years.
Hmm.
So yeah, yeah, I mean, I don't really see safety risks from layer two's scaling that don't exist in layer one scaling. I actually think like layer two scaling is better for experimentation because you
Hmm.
can roll out different approaches to scaling in parallel, and you don't really need to put all of your eggs into one basket to the same extent. So yeah, I mean, I don't think that's an issue.
Okay, I guess like maybe like usability, like UX UI, is the issue at the moment, right? With layer twos.
Yeah, I think that's a real issue. I think there's definitely more that we can do to improve it. Like, I think there's more that we can do to improve people's ability to, say, move assets between different layer twos.
Hmm.
Like between, there's more that we can do to improve people's ability to kind of move between the different layer twos safely.
Hmm.
Like, I think there's a big difference between, like, say, being on Loopring or Arbitrum and being on Avalanche, right? Like, Avalanche is yes, like you're bridging into a separate layer one, and whereas with Arbitrum, you're like basically you're moving onto a platform that actually is secured by the underlying blockchain. And
Hmm.
like right now, MetaMask and like the other browsers don't really make a good job of making that distinction clear to users, and I think it's important to make that distinction clear to users. So like there's definitely a lot more of kind of usability work that can be done, both on like just plain old like just regular like usability of the ecosystem and make it easier for people to like just understand the concept of hopping between chains and like what happens when they hop between chains, but also like the usability of security, and like making it clearer to users like what's going on and like in what cases are they actually safe and in what cases are they not safe.
Yeah.
But like these are all things that lots of people are working on.
Yeah. Okay, so this is very, very much related to a post you recently wrote on. You said the future will be multi-chain, but not cross-chain. And so you said that there are fundamental security limits to bridges between chains. While, as you were explaining right now, you don't think there's kind of security compromises on moving between Ethereum and layer twos, but there is moving between Ethereum and other chains. And I guess like you were proven right recently with the hack to the wormhole bridge. Like that happened like very kind of a few days after you posted that, so it was like, oh, Vitalik was right. But it really does make sense. It makes sense that it's a lot riskier to live in this cross chain, in this kind of multi chain world. But if that's the case, and the future is living in kind of this layer ones and there are layer two scalability solutions, and maybe there are different communities using different blockchains, doesn't that just do we lose out on kind of this key feature of blockchain and crypto, that's composability? And wouldn't we go back to like just like another set of walled gardens?
I mean, I do think that like even if we like even like I think bridges will continue to exist. I mean, I just like as I think I mentioned in my post, kind of one of the conclusions of like at least this thinking is that there's this kind of anti-network effect to bridge security, where bridges become less safe if lots of people are using them, but that also means that they become very safe if not that many people are using them. So there will be still some use of them. Even if there aren't any bridges, there will still be decentralized exchanges, right? So it's not like you're not going to be able to like move. There's these walled gardens and you can't move things between them at all. Like you will be able to have your Solana coins on Solana, and then you'll be able to decentralize trade them into Ether on Ethereum, or and then trade that into like Bitcoin on the Bitcoin network. And the tools for doing that are getting more efficient, and I think they're only continuing to get more efficient. And so, it definitely still will continue to be possible to kind of be someone who is a multi-blockchain hopping person, where you have to do some of your stuff on some ecosystem and other things on other ecosystems, and you just kind of hop between them as you need to. Like the only thing that that we will not see much of is like Ethereum native assets being on applications on Solana or vice versa. But like I don't even necessarily think that we need to, right? Well, like if your application uses Ethereum native assets, then like it can be on Ethereum, and if your application uses Solana native assets, they can be on Solana. And if people want to like borrow both, then they can just like use like an application that does both on both sides. And like I think that's like the law, like that kind, the amount that we lose from that kind of interoperability, I think, versus like maximum interoperability where every asset can just be teleported everywhere, is not actually that high. And the like the reduction in kind of tail risk and kind of systemic risk of to the ecosystem is, I think, definitely pretty significant. But yeah, so like I think one way to think about the analogy would be like one way to do a walled garden would be for like if you take Twitter and Facebook, and then you make it possible for people to have pieces of content that like points to pieces of content that were created by other platforms. But then another kind of interoperability might be like, what if like Facebook gains the ability to like have an API call where you can just make retweets, right? And like you can see how like that second one is like more dangerous than the first, right? And I think like in the case of cryptocurrency, like it's like once you actually move, like there's a difference between messages and assets, and once you start moving assets over, then like you get this kind of higher level of trust that doesn't like that you would otherwise not be getting. But yeah. So okay, I guess. Sorry, I've just realized that this is this kind of really complicated and just fun technical rabbit hole. As
No, it's interesting.
lots of things in crypto are these like technical rabbit holes where like they're not like it isn't. easy to make like one single like conclusion where we can say like yay one word and boo another word. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
it really depends on the case, and like you will still be able to to interoperate, and it'll look like you can interoperate in a lot of ways, but like just this one particular thing of jumping assets around is something that is just always going to have this inevitable risk premium attached. Is I guess the conclusion.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. And maybe some people will be willing to pay for that risk, or take that
Yeah.
risk. Right. Yeah. Okay. So then the other guest I had on that I wanted to get your thoughts was Idan Yago, who's building a DeFi application on top of Bitcoin, and he, as I think probably many of developers building on top of Bitcoin, thinks that Bitcoin is the only legitimate layer for decentralized applications and Web3 to be built on, because it is the most trustworthy blockchain. It's the most decentralized. It's the most secure. And so to him, if we're going to be rebuilding the financial system, it should be on top of the most secure blockchain. And if he were to build his application on Ethereum, he would be using an unreliable foundation. So yeah, and I think this kind of echoes a lot of Bitcoin maximalist views. So yeah, I wanted to get your thoughts.
Yeah. I guess I have two ways of replying to that. Like one is like a little bit more trolly, and the other one is meaningful. I'll start with the trolly one. The trolly one is that this year Ethereum is switching to proof of stake, and proof of stake is better and more secure than proof of work. And so after the merge, Ethereum will actually be the most secure base layer. It's trolly because Bitcoiners are going to just yell and scream and totally disagree with this, but it is my belief, and I've written big long pieces about why in a whole bunch of places. The other and more meaningful answer that I think kind of gets at some interesting differences is that this gets to a post that I wrote a couple of years ago called Base Layers and Functionality Escape Velocity. It's like if you just go to vitalik.ca and you just control F for escape velocity, you should be able to find it. The core idea basically is that it's not enough for a base layer to be decentralized. The base layer also needs to have the ability to build things on top of it without adding extra centralization in the middle, right? So I guess one possible analogy for this would be, imagine if you had a country where that country followed very kind of libertarian rules about political morality, right? Very strong property rights. If it's if you have a piece of property, you can do whatever you want on top of it, but a piece of property is indivisible, and the only property lots that exist are property lots that are the size of a city, right? So the only plots of lands that currently exist and have property rights attached are the size of 10 by 10 square kilometers, and you can't split them up. The only thing that you can do is you can make legal contracts that would get that might would get enforced by a court system, but even there people might get bankrupt and weird things could happen. So in that kind of world, it looks like the base layer perfectly respects property rights, right? And it looks like the base layer does everything that someone who cares about that sort of thing would really want. But because the base layer only deals with property in these kind of institutionally large chunks, from the point of view of a person experiencing living inside of this country, they might not actually experience that much freedom, right? And the reason why they might not actually experience that much freedom is because if they want to actually live, they would have to live inside of basically one of possibly a few thousand private cities, and those private cities might have whatever rules that they have, and possibly if there's this if the underlying culture is fairly authoritarian, and if there's if the culture is fairly conformist or whatever, then it's possible that all of these cities are actually going to be fairly crappy and not and do a good job of respecting people's rights, right? So kind of the moral is that even if your base layer is decentralized, because in this particular case it doesn't have the enough functionality in this case, which would be like allowing people to like actually own like their own property and not just like basically have relationships with people that own like these incredibly big city-sized chunks of land, like because it doesn't have the functionality. Well, it turns out that like the experienced level of kind of like freedom and sovereignty and whatever you want to call it living in this country is actually not very high, right?
Right.
So I think with Bitcoin it's kind of similar in that like the Bitcoin based chain does not support the like complicated scripting, right? So like it doesn't support what we call rich statefulness, and because of that, it's not possible to create a rollup on top of Bitcoin, right? The only scaling solution that it can support is the Lightning Network. You can't create a rollup on top of Bitcoin. You can't create a plasma chain on top of Bitcoin. You cannot create complicated smart contracts on top of Bitcoin. So if, like, for example, we want to, like, let's say you take the Ethereum Foundation multisig, right? The way the Ethereum Foundation multisig works is that there are 7 participants and you need 4 out of 7 to move large amounts of money, but any 1 out of 7 can withdraw small amounts of money up to a maximum of a certain amount every day. And the problem is that, like, this up to a certain amount every day thing, that's not like a feature that doing that requires being able to remember that, like, oh, you already made a transaction and you already made a transaction of this size. That's not something that the Bitcoin scripting like language is really able to like process, right? And so if you want to build that kind of design on top of Bitcoin, you have to build it on top of a system that exists on top of Bitcoin, but then that system actually has to add its own trust assumption, right?
Right.
So like if you take Liquid, for example, right? Like Liquid is a multisig. Like it basically is a permissioned consortium blockchain, like, but you know, it's run by like permissioned people that the Bitcoin community trusts, and so like it doesn't get lumped into the same category as like what some of the what some of the banks are doing, right? But
Is rootstock the same? Just like a
Rootstock
trusted.
is I think in its current form, yes. I believe their long-term vision is that they actually want Bitcoin miners to be able to kind of enforce the connection between Bitcoin and Rootstock. But like, I actually haven't checked Rootstock in a while. So like, if you get a Rootstock person on and they, we would be happy to be corrected by them, right?
Okay.
But like, if they can get miners to agree on like enough things to make the like Rootstock what I would call trustless, then like they've basically they would have essentially turned Bitcoin into something very different from what Bitcoin is today, right? Like that
Right.
basically is like doing a soft fork. So that, which like would be an interesting way of upgrading Bitcoin, right? But we have to call it what it is, which is like it's upgrading Bitcoin. And like if you upgrade Bitcoin, then of course like you can give it like functionality escape velocity, right? So I guess Bitcoin in its current form, right, like it doesn't have functionality escape velocity. It definitely does have a lot of genuine decentralization that plenty of chains really don't have, but it doesn't have this other thing. And so, like, because it doesn't have like this functionality escape velocity, because it doesn't have enough functionality to be able to kind of build whatever like layer 2 you want to do, whatever what the layer 1 doesn't on top, like the level of like self-sovereignty experienced by users, it ends up being like kind of heavily mediated and much less than like the level that's kind of offered by the chain in theory. And like if Bitcoin wants to improve on that, then it has to add functionality. And like I do know that there are some people that wants to do that, which I think is good. But like that's, I guess, the situation where it is today.
Yeah. So it's interesting because like they're building on top of Bitcoin because of like all these different features, but like self sovereignty, decentralization features. But to do that, they need to build actually on top of layer 2s, and they are giving away those features when they do that. So. Okay, before we run out of time, I wanted to get your thoughts on kind of the latest Ethereum crypto Twitter drama or controversy, I should say, which is happened around when there have been different tweets or statements or comments that people have made in the past that were racist or misogynistic or just stuff that other people in the Ethereum community disagreed with. And so those statements have been met with those people who made them getting fired or removed from their roles and so on. So basically, cancel culture coming to Ethereum. There was, I mean, probably the most notable case happened with someone from ENS, which you've mentioned. Something he said on in 2016 about, he said homosexual acts are evil, transgenderism doesn't exist, abortion is murder, contraception is perversion. I mean, all this stuff that goes against a lot of the values of, I think, like many of many people in the Ethereum community, and so he lost his role because of saying that. It's very, I think it's a very kind of tough issue. I mean, I'm 100% kind of like a free speech advocate. I would want everyone to have the right to say whatever without kind of fear of retaliation. But at the same time, I also see the point of people who say, you know, these are public figures. They are building for a community that wants to be inclusive, and they're saying things against many members of their communities, and you know they're feeling hurt and so on, and they're not kind of good representatives of Ethereum or like of the apps that they're working with. So where do you stand on this?
Yeah, I guess like I definitely have some like different kinds of complicated and nuanced opinions on this. I
Mm-hmm.
guess like one of them is that I think like Brantley's kind of like failing over this last week was definitely not just kind of like having opinions that lots of people disagree with, right? Like I think like his other big failing was that like when the whole drama happened, like he responded by like first having this Twitter space where he like like didn't just double down on the opinions, but double down on them in this kind of very ham-fisted way. That like a lot of kind of hiding behind like you know my religion tells me to believe this, so I believe this, and in a way that like didn't really make people feel like he kind of like understood or engaged with the opposing perspectives, and ultimately, like you know, he is a major delegate. He is a representative uh, of a company. He is like also a delegate within the ENS DAO.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have a political role, then like it is part of your job to be able to handle controversies well, right? So like I don't think you can even claim that like oh it's you know he got kicked out because of something that's like not relevant to him being able to do his job well. Like I think in some ways it is relevant, right? So that's like one nuanced point. I guess another nuanced point would be that one thing that often gets lost here is that there's there is this kind of U.S. centric like aspects to the culture that unfortunately gets played up like every time things like this happen, right? And
Mm-hmm.
like if you follow these kind of recent deplatforming debates closely, one of the things that you find is that the people who are the most strongly against the deplatformings are often foreigners and are often like even foreign dissidents that are kind of escaping from cancel cultures that are much more kind of like um, shall we say, yeah, intense than even like
Mm-hmm.
things that the U.S. has, right? So, like Alexei Navalny, the Russian dissident who has, you know, unfortunately been languishing in prison for the last year or so, he was one of the strongest opponents of Donald Trump being kicked out of Twitter about a year ago, right? Because, like, ultimately, yeah, the like precedents do matter, and when you do something you are legitimizing that like that action being done in general, including that action being done in the long term often by other people who you don't like and you can't control, and like if that is something that's I think people do needs to be constantly have their attention to and kind of also be concerned about, and like just from like my own like personal observation, like there's definitely like I've seen Latin American Ethereum community members, there were Chinese Ethereum community members that had like definitely not like knee-jerk hostile perspectives to what happens, but definitely perspectives of like you know oof, like you know we need to be careful about this,
Mm-hmm.
and that's so I think it's like when things like this are done, it's important that they are done in a way that kind of clearly signals like what actually is being done, like what are the values behind what's being done, and like for example, why this doesn't set a precedent that like say for example in the future someone might be denied like the ENS DAO might like make a protocol change that would like take away the .eth name of someone that they decide like has bad opinions, right? Like that's
Mm,
clearly something that I think like nobody wants, or very few people want ENS to go in that direction. Like I certainly don't want ENS to go in that direction, but like
mm,
that needs to be like it needs to be clearly communicated for why why like what was done this week is not the first stepping stone to doing something like that. Like and like I believe that can be clearly communicated, but it has to be. So that's, I
mm,
guess, nuanced opinion number two. Nuanced opinion number three is like, I personally favor at least having 14-day cooldowns before anyone is fired because of a scandal. Like, I personally would love
mm,
it if that was like a general social rule that everyone had. I mean, numbers even higher than 14 would be even better. And like, yes, that does mean that there's going to be people that are very uncomfortable that will just have to sit on their discomfort for a while. But at the same time, I think like sitting on the discomfort and not making knee-jerk decisions is something that's very healthy, and it's something that it is a muscle that um, that we need to exercise, and I think that is something that would also be better at like clearly communicating to the community that what was done was the result of a well considered deliberation and not like the cultural revolution is coming to Ethereum now or whatever.
mm,
Nuanced opinion number four is that I think like one of the beauties of the Ethereum community is that it is this kind of diverse and it has different sub communities, and Ethereum is not any one of its sub communities, right? And like people who get and so I think that does give permission for sub communities to be more opinionated.
mm,
And like there have been people that have been kind of quote canceled from some Ethereum sub communities that do continue to prosper in other Ethereum sub communities, right? So like Amin might
mm,
be one good example of that, right? Like there's plenty of kind of woke and social justice leaning people that have various reasons to dislike him, but at the same time he's got Rai, he's there's the Money God and Moloch now and
mm,
all of these projects, and like there's plenty of people who are happy with him being him, and he continues to prosper in that way. So I think it's important to not kind of over catastrophize and over interpret an Ethereum sub community acting in a particular way as like, oh, these are the values of Ethereum now.
mm,
Because like Ethereum is big and Ethereum values are big. And I don't think like either myself or any Ethereum sub community like really have the right to define what all of Ethereum stands for. And that's like I think it's healthy that is the case. But also it does like kind of on the other hand mean that we should be careful about like we should be careful to kind of protect the Ethereum base layer from um, falling into controversies like this, right? So, like for example, sometimes people argue in favor of should the idea that like should we print more ETH in order to like fund some base layer public goods at the protocol layer, and
mm,
like this is actually one good argument against, right? Like, do we really want the entire Ethereum community ending up like making decisions, like basically being forced to create this kind of big collective social signal that like Ethereum stands in one direction or another direction on just like some issue that ends up being like totally globally controversial, right? Like I think a lot of people do come to Ethereum as as a refuge from like whatever like their local political issues are, and like the world
mm,
is a big place, and there's plenty of cases in which seeking a refuge from your local political issues is like a totally legitimate thing that should totally not be denigrated. And like Ethereum turning into a reflection, like just a reflection of like not even just the world, but like even this one very particular slice of the world that cares about like some particular issues and not other issues is definitely something that could also limit its potential. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like this is unfortunate. No, I'm not gonna kind of wave the free Brantley flag or the kind of like get rid of Brantley or the let's go Brantley or whatever flags. Like I'm not so much, unfortunately, just complicated perspectives because this whole thing is a complicated space.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a topic that's so that needs to be treated with nuance. I don't think there is like one straightforward answer to it. I hate that we're kind of running out of time. I had so many more questions, and I actually have to get on a Twitter space with your mom now about Metis. So I don't want to keep her waiting. I guess just like one quick final question to wrap this up, if you can. So I've been asking each guest what makes them defiant, in line with the show's name. So what makes you defiant?
What makes me defiant? That's a good question. I mean, I feel like I defy lots of things. I mean, I defy coin voting governance. I defy I defy a lot of people's desires to take very short term actions that push the crypto space in a direction that looks nice in the short term but isn't really sustainable. I did what else have I defied recently? I guess I defied Avalanche on Twitter yesterday. That was definitely defying. I think. I mean, see, this is the other thing, right? Like, I feel like I don't really I don't kind of stand for one radical thing as much as I just try to think about different issues and like whatever my opinion, whatever my perspective is, like that's what my perspective is, and it's almost like the more that you can't predict someone's opinions from their other opinions, the more valuable those opinions are. And so I definitely kind of like try hard to actually like think about things separately and not let any of people's existing boxes guide me. So yeah, I mean, I feel you're not going to get one thing, but you are going to get a very long list. And if you want to find out what that long list is, then I've written and Twittered a bunch of stuff for a while, and I probably will keep doing that.
Yes, please do. They're the best. Okay, Vitalik, it was so great chatting. I wish we had more time. Hopefully, you'll be back on the Defiant podcast at some other time, and we can continue this conversation. Really a pleasure chatting with you. Such interesting takes on everything. So again, I appreciate you taking the time, and thank you so much. And
yeah, thank
see
you
you
too.
soon.
This has been great.